I was asked to talk about prescribed fire in a way a little differently. So my talk is about prescribed fire monitoring and partnerships and trying to get to scale and figure some of these things out. So I'm not going to talk about specifics of fire effects on different vegetation types such as shortleaf and seasonality and get into the weeds on all of that and the research related to each variety of those types of topics. Many experts here have covered that, so I'm going to talk about fire management a little differently. Designing for scale. You know, we do a lot of small burns, and that's okay. One of the burn crew was at Starbucks the other day, and they asked to burn off the Bermuda field, so they did around the backside. Just kidding. No joke. But really, how do we get from burning small-scale stuff to landscape scale fire management, or thinking conceptually about fire management? Not everybody has the position to think like that. You know, Jim Goulden, several other of you in the room are researchers. This is how you think on big-scale stuff. Obviously, Mike now as the director. But as managers, this presentation talks kind of focused on managers. You know, you guys are in the weeds, you're barely making things go, you're keeping the wheels on, and so you don't have to have the big picture. But what I want to stress out of this talk is that, you know, what we've learned, that little things create a big impact. About 3 years ago, the Nature Conservancy looked all across the world at all these projects that they had done with their partners and then other projects that they had done or been a part of, not necessarily led. And they wrote this white paper called Designing for Success. This paper was like a 5-page white paper, but in it had 6 things that were the things that created change across the landscape at scale, whether it be seafood, sustainable seafood, or global forestry issues like slowing down Brazilian rainforest type stuff. But these 6 things is what I looked at to define our program and our work in Arkansas and try to figure out how, if we have what it takes to get to scale and where we're going, because we're still learning all of this stuff as we go. And I'm looking at it through the lens of several things that we've worked on here. So really, we're looking at shortleaf pine, oak woodlands in Arkansas. Many of you, we've already talked about all of this. But you know, really the core people that are doing most of the burning is the public lands folks, the national forests. And they've been doing that for a long time. And our partners as well have been creating fire programs. But it's 3.5 million acres just of public land alone and 250 endemic species. You know, Martin did a great talk. Is he still in the room? Yes, he is. He did a great talk about the history of this stuff. But you know, we know what was out there historically, okay? This gets to defining your vision, okay? We have the pictures of what it looked like historically. Now we come along and we have the science that tells us. There's a tree cookie out front. We've got one from Arkansas here. It shows us the fire history from these places. We look at the scale of the fire effects across the landscape. We looked at the GLO records to determine kind of what the frequency was and how open the forests were. And we know that fires burned at scale, and at scale means 500,000 to 1 million acres, you know, in a season. It wasn't uncommon to have 70% of the interior highlands burned off on a dry year. And then Tom Fotai, this statement right here, Tom, if you're in the room, was pretty controversial about 10 years ago, because about 12, 15 years ago, because you know, having the lead ecologists for the state say this place was all on fire for 12,000 years, that, you know, for managers that weren't used to doing fire management and timber folks, it was, and even private landowners, it was a real out on the limb thing to say. So good job, Tom. And then we grow up with this ecosystem here that we all, like Bob was talking about, that we all know and love, and then we've got people like Tom Fotai telling us the whole place was on fire all the time. But what we do know is this was a really unhealthy ecosystem. It doesn't have built-in resiliency. It's stressed in all different types of things, from droughts to bugs to invasives, and it's not disturbed, and it has very little biodiversity in the system. And so we know what our story is. We know how we've impacted the land in Arkansas and the region in the interior highlands. And then, so we know these things, but how do we do it? How do we come up with this idea of moving to scale? Well, what we did is we just took all the acres that were under potentially fire-maintained ecosystems, shortleaf pine, oak, woodlands, and added those acres up and divided by 3. Pretty easy, really. And so, in 2000, does this have a pointer? Yeah, 2000, the interior highlands, the Ozark National Forest was burning 3,000 acres, and the Ouachitas was burning 31,000. That comes to a total of 34,000 acres in the state. And the Ouachitas, that was because they had Management Area 22, and they were mandated to maintain those RCWs. And so here's where we were, what is it, 2016? 16 years ago. And in 2013, we've, with all the partners working, we're up to about 300,000 acres a year. That sounds like a lot of acres, but when we're talking about we need about 600,000 acres a year, we're trying to figure out if that's the scale and what is scale. So the other thing that we need to think about is how to make other people care. I spend a lot of time, moving around, talking to people, and on burns, trying to figure out how to get people to see what we're doing. As managers of places, everybody's out in the woods. You're not where the urban people are. You're out in the woods. You're doing something. You're doing timber, unless you're Bob. Bob, you live in a pretty urbanized area, but they still see your work. But you can be remote in New Jersey. I've been up there. But how to make other people care. This is Larry Nance. He's our deputy state forester. Many of you might know him, but we do a prescribed fire workshop every year, and it's going on this week in Arkansas. And we a few years ago decided to get the media to this event. It's on a military base. It's highly restricted. We do a week-long training, and we had to get driver's license and all these things for our visitors. And then we had to organize a whole incident within an incident just to manage on a military base the public relations nightmare of having the media on a military base. But it was for a good cause, because then we've got all the partners at the table talking about what we're doing with fire management in the summertime when the West is burning down. Perfect. So media, making other people care, and we developed a media strategy very early on as we started this restoration work. Martin talked a little bit about extensively about the partnership, but what he didn't talk about was the media aspect and the public outreach that is crucial to get kind of this idea of everybody's on the same page. So it's important to figure out your media strategy, whatever that is for your landscape, and it doesn't have to be everything. Trust me, we had everything on here from kids groups at every school in Arkansas. That didn't fly because nobody could do it. The other thing is who the message comes from. This is a state park. This is at Hobbs State Park in the Ozarks, and that's Fred Sutton, and he's a law enforcement officer / fire manager. This is the problem with developing fire programs, is that if it's not institutionalized, it goes to public safety, and if public safety's fire is a threat, not a benefit, then it's really hard to sell it up the chain of why you need to be doing controlled burns. So a lot of little things we think about we can change, we just have to figure them out. But the message here is important from the person in the NOMAX, the day of the burn, after the burn's going on. Don't be afraid of the media, bring them to your world. These guys, they love it, actually. They love to come and see the fire and smoke. The other thing is have the experts, not just have the fire people talk, but also the why behind the fire. Fred's really good at talking about the fire was good, we had a good plan, the plan was organized, nobody got hurt, the road was clear. But the broader context of this stuff of the why we are burning is really what galvanizes money and secures support. Hopefully, Martin, you didn't mind me using that photo. The other thing is you don't have to go mac out. You don't have to do it all. but little local television or newspapers are everywhere, or used to be, and these guys are always loving to get something in the paper, especially on Sunday, the Sunday morning run of the weekend section. They'll always put a color photo of a prescribed burn on there if they can get it, in which we take advantage of almost weekly, if not monthly, during the burn season. The other thing is, I don't think does anybody know this guy in the room? Uh-oh. Well, don't tell him I used his photo. This is our state director, Scott Simon. He's an old fire boss as well. But the point of this message is the folks that have the funding or they have the ability to leverage funding for your program need to know and see and understand what you're doing. And so I always make it a point to get him out to the Camp Robinson workshop every year and to tour around and see the guys, and to, actually that was a hot burn. That was in September last year, and that was, it was about 92 degrees, and I put him over there and on purpose and said, hey, let me get your picture in front of the fire.
That is no Mexican.
Yeah. But the point of this is senior a lot of times us managers get in our little world and don't want to talk to the powers that be above us, and just we send in our budget and we hope and pray that it doesn't get cut. And that used to work, but nowadays with the way that fire's going, we need the projects that have been successful are the ones that really shake the cages and scream for budgetary assistance by getting them out on tours. All right, Martin touched extensively on this, so I won't get into the partnership aspects of everything, but I will say, one of the key barriers in the Shortleaf Pine initiative, I was fortunate enough to help Mike and the guys and girls work on the planning team for the Shortleaf initiative. And one of the key barriers that kept coming up all across the country was lack of fire programs and lack of fire training. So I want to talk a little bit about that in a way that's a little different. Fire management options, there's not many choices. You can either build a fire program, you can hire a contractor, or you can do a hybrid of both. Or you can wait for lightning or an arsonist. But those really aren't management options. You don't have control of those two, unless you know somebody. But the point here is both of these options have risks and costs associated with them. But you need to work through the math to figure out what best fits your needs. And like I said, we use a combination of both and not all three. We don't use arsonist or we do use lightning, Jim, don't we? On the forest. But a fire crew, a fire module, there's many ways to say it. You can call it anything you want, but it's people that are dedicated to figuring out each year who's going to burn what and where, and who the boss is, and what the priorities are. And they're going to track the budget and make sure all the equipment's organized and make sure all the burn plans are written and signed and all of the little details that go into an integrated fire management program. And the reason I say that is because if you don't designate somebody as the fire manager or fire boss, it becomes a duty that nobody really wants to do, or that somebody wants to do, but it doesn't become a priority within the organization. Okay? And all of this started primarily from our Prescribed Fire Council. Does Tennessee have a Prescribed Fire Council? Okay. All of this work started pretty much from the partnerships of the Prescribed Fire Council. We have many different partnerships that wear different hats. I'm sure Tom Fotai and Blaney and Jim Goulden probably are a part of like 6 or 8 different committees or groups within the region doing something. The Prescribed Fire Council is just one arm of something. But this is where people talk about fire. This is where people talk about burning. This is where people talk about what's going well, what's not, and challenges. This is where you can begin to think about how to build your fire program. And I'll tell you a story of how it works in Arkansas. You know, we've decided over the years that a lot of landowners, this training is a week long, and it's primarily for state agency folks or federal agency folks like the NRCS. George is in the room. George has been gracious to broadcast it far and wide for NRCS, and now NRCS it's a required training for NRCS if they're writing burn prescriptions or burn plans or recommending burns for landowners. through the NRCS co-op programs. And so we get 15 NRCS folks a year that come through the project, and it's great because then they start. What's happened is that there's a lot of landowners now that want training, and we've had to figure out a way to organize around this because we just don't want to send training, kind of loosey-goosey training out there. Now everybody's running around burning without some kind of plan. You'll get into restrictive burning, and we don't want that. We don't want to create a burden for our firefighters out there, our volunteer fire departments. But we've completed, Martin said the number here is double. We've completed a bunch of these landowner workshop trainings, which are one day on a Saturday and not during a Arkansas Razorback football game. And that's really built this momentum around these public lands. But for the state and federal folks, these are guys just like you and us. It's Arkansas Forestry, it's the forestry folks, it's the wildlife folks, Arkansas Game and Fish, it's the Arkansas State Parks. It's any agency there. It's the Corps of Engineers. It's the military bases, the Camp Robinsons and the Fort Chaffees. It's pretty much anybody in the state that's managing some kind of piece of land. It doesn't have to be big, but this training has been going on for 97, and we've run hundreds of students through it. And everybody goes at all scales of the food chain, senior managers all the way down. So it's not just the bottom rung people that are getting training. It's dozer operators to regional biologists that's recommended for this. But what the whole point of this is, it gets people talking. If you spend a week burning with people, next thing you know, you become a friend or some kind of associate, and you know somebody who knows somebody. And over time, as these guys move around, it's like one big network. And over the years, this is annually. This is an average of annually. We used to do one burn. 10, 15 years ago, we were doing one burn together. The agencies and everybody was kind of playing in their little sandbox in their world. But now, I can't even keep track of it. And it's not a lot compared to other places, but this has been our trajectory, is that there's 15, 20 co-ops going on. This has augmented another 15 to possibly 20 to 30,000 acres of burning out there that wouldn't otherwise get done across the system because of lack of manpower. These guys are also wanting to burn their favorite places, and usually they're the high-profile places. We're burning in all the major high-profile areas. This is another one of the strategies with the partnership, is that fire is not something we do way off in the middle of nowhere. We've been doing that for 20 years, and it hadn't been working. And so we've taken it to the people now, and we've focused on the highest priority, the largest tracts of land close to urban centers. So we're burning Pinnacle Mountain State Park. Gets 1 million people or 500,000 people a year. We're burning right up. We're closing visitor centers on slow days, and we're putting fire in there to really show people in the public that this is good for the ecosystem and the park in general. It's a team effort. It's not just agency folks that are involved. All the VFDs surrounding these parks and these state parks and these federal lands, respond to wildfires, and so we get them involved. And then at the park level, really the point is that we're getting the senior. If the senior managers are around while a control burn's going, we try to make sure that they come out and see what's going on, even if they're busy. We try to just let them know, we're burning. Come out and show us, and we'll show you. And here, grab a drip torch, and because they take ownership of that then, and it starts to kind of change actually. So, and all this stuff's lessons learned from the partners, and not really from all of my experience. So I'm talking about from all the things I've learned from everybody else. This well-trained VFD thing is huge. We didn't realize it until a few years ago. We were one of our largest state parks is Hobbs State Park. It's up in northwest Arkansas. It's about 18,000 acres, and this place is beautiful, piney shortleaf pine woods all across the system, and it's rugged and steep, and it's really close to northwest Arkansas Bentonville headquarters. It gets a lot of traffic and a lot of people. And these guys up here were struggling. They were having wildfires. They were burning maybe 700 acres every year, if that. Out of that 18,000, they weren't keeping up with it. Long story short is once we got the VFDs involved and really started ramping up our fire programs there, the whole community loves it. They cook us lunch and bring pizzas, and it's just we call it their own little burning world up there. They've created this really cool model of public support. No complaints. We put smoke across the lake up there, and you know what smoke does on a lake. And big smoke management issues up there, and if it wasn't for the VFDs out in the community every day and having them engaged, then we would probably be shut down up there. I can almost guarantee it. And then these places to play, these demonstration sites, these are key. This is just one example of Gene Rush, and Martin showed you a lot of pictures of that. But you know, all these places can be pretty far remote, so it's not uncommon for us to get in the car or get in the trucks and get in the engines and drive 4 or 5 hours to go show up at 8 or 9 in the morning to help some guys burn and way off in a WMA somewhere. And all partners are doing that on these high priority places because it's important to keep fire rotations in there. It's kind of a young man's game. Getting old. So partnerships can go on, but those are just a few key things there. You know, one thing that's been huge that I've seen in Arkansas, and you know, is this lack of monitoring. And it came up in the regional workshops, and there's never any money for it. Nobody really knows how to do it. It's hard to look for what you are defining, what you're monitoring. And so we took the basic approach here. You're not gonna monitor everywhere, but monitoring starts, if you're doing burns, it starts in the burn plan. That's where it starts. What are your burn objectives? What are your parameters? What kind of fire effects do you want on the vegetation? That's all you have to do is do some kind of post-burn, pre-burn, post-burn monitoring. The larger context of monitoring is to tell that bigger scale picture and that bigger scale story that Martin was sharing, that Jim was talking about. We do have landscape scale monitoring program across both forests with the CFLRP work, the federal projects that are going on there. And this monitoring is extensive as far as counting plants and trees and shrubs, but this is tracking changes over time. But you know, the game and fish guys and the state parks guys, they don't need to do any monitoring. You know, if the Forest Service is doing it and TNC's helping them, or they have a partner that's helping them, then really, and they're gleaning the lessons learned from that, and everything's really similar, then that's okay. You know, not every program has to have an extensive monitoring program. This is adaptive management. This isn't research either. But what monitoring is allowing us to do is to quantify treatment results, adjust our fire regimes, as Martin talked about, adjust the timber harvest, as he talked about, and these mid-story treatments. The other thing is when we talk about fire and frequency and seasonality, we're burning in, you know, under parameters. These parameters are pretty much you know, socially constructed parameters about keeping the fire in the box. We don't want the fire to get out, and this is a good thing. However, not all fires historically burned under those parameters, and the effects of those fires are, for us, hard and elusive to come by under controlled conditions. So we have to be aware of that and try to figure out how the best we can manage, with knowing that our prescribed fires, you know, whatever percent of the time is not mimicking historic fire events. So is our fire regimes appropriate, you know, every spring, the same place, the same year, you know, every 3 years, every spring, you know? And if you get into stuff like that, then you need to start thinking about something different. If you're burning the same place and it looks the same over a 10-year period, then you're probably doing something wrong. We've learned a lot about seasonality of fire and growing season burning. I talk a little bit about growing season burning. Growing season burning is just when you know, as folks say in the South, when sap comes up. It doesn't necessarily have to have trees or buds on the trees, but when the sap rises, that's what we'd consider growing season. But you can have a very small fire, you know, primarily in shortleaf pine oak. As long as there's a component of shortleaf in there, it's going to burn year round, almost guaranteed. Even if closed canopy untreated, just depending on the day. But this fire here is literally, I took this picture and it was literally, I could step over it, you know, 6-inch, maybe a foot flame length, moving real slow, backing down the hill, you know, but it had, you know, 20-foot scorch heights, you know. Didn't damage the overstory at all, but can have pretty good ecological effects on that shrub regen. You can also have fires that you think have done devastating effects. You know, this is an August burn. Actually, it's a late September, early October burn 2 years ago. And the shortleaf pine oak regen, and it ripped up this hill. It flanked across this hill with about 6.5 foot flame lengths on an 87-degree day. Just flanked across it. And the Forest Service called me and said, "You need to come look at this." And so I went up there and did some monitoring of it. And I don't have a post picture because it got deleted. I lost it on my phone. But this is actually gorgeous right now. It looks perfect. It killed all of the regeneration. But you know, for timber managers, these guys had a heart attack. You know, these trees are dead. And they did lose a few, but this burned about 120 acres through here. A few trees, overstory mortality. But so anyways, without monitoring, you can't quantify what you did with those fires without knowing the temperature of the day and the humidity. The other thing is, are we using our tools correctly? Martin touched extensively on this. You know, you take this and you thin it a little bit, and then it looks like this 1 year, and you think, I got it, I did it, but you're going to lose overstory BA, and then everything you cut down is going to start growing back really, really rapidly. You just took the lid off of the shrubs, and now here they come. You know, you're opened it up for shrub regen. This is the same picture 3 years later, different season obviously, but you can see what lack of 3-year fire return interval does in the piney woods. Grows up really fast. You know, the point is as you manage this stuff, you're changing the primary carrier of fire. What you're managing now is, instead of thinking about 7-foot flame lengths in a Fuel Model 9, now you've taken it and made a shrubby forb component that's almost like a Fuel Model, like a riparian. So you're getting actually half the flame lengths out of what you're trying to manage. So you got to think about these things from a fire management standpoint as you manage for effects. And then it takes a couple of years for grass to get established in our woods. It just doesn't happen overnight. You know, even if the components are there, it's going to take a few years for your warm season grasses to get in there. It's going to stay forby for a long time. And as soon as winter hits, this forbs all goes away, and this really doesn't carry fire. So it's the leaf litter and the needles that are carrying the fire here. So without grass, this is still like a Fuel Model 2 so you're putting 4-foot flame lengths in here. And so the effects of your next few burns are going to be reduced compared to your first couple of burns. These demonstration sites are important. You've got to understand the importance of these, and all of the guys are trying to figure this out. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to make car parks and disco lights out there, but what you have to do is have a consistent message for your demonstration sites. This guy is awesome. He spent a few years in this role now, him and Brad Carner, and they have their plan, and they're organized, and they know exactly what's going on out there, and they can take legislators and delegates from the congressional delegation in Arkansas there in 20 minutes and know what to say and say it right. But the long-term commitment is these ideas of these agencies, these partnerships, these collaboratives lasting into perpetuity, much longer than we would anticipate. Management. This management stuff, once you start down this road and start with your partnerships, it's like a lifelong thing. It's a career. And with the longer these collaboratives stick together and do little projects and then grow, the funding does come with it, as Martin showed in his presentation. So it does work. It necessarily doesn't get you more money, doesn't necessarily make more acres treated in fire management, obviously, because hiring freezes and whatnot. But what I hope to do in this talk was take us from burning a parking lot at Starbucks and thinking about the concepts at scale. And even though we're not there, we can run the numbers and we can know where we're going and where we've been. And this is like a 5-year return on total acres burned. And you can see that our partnerships has been increasing substantially the number of acres burned on a 5-year rotation. That's cumulative every 5 years across the ecosystem. And then percent to annual within our portfolio sites. This is once again a percent to our goal. We're here, but the next step, this is 289,000 acres. What we originally told ourselves 10, 15 years ago that we needed 600, actually 10 years ago, who am I kidding? 17 years ago, I'm getting old, that we needed 650,000 acres. And so 17 years later, we're only halfway there. And I just wanted to thank Mike for coming out a few seasons ago and walking around, kicking the woods and talking fire. So, thank you.